This is the Doctor, President-elect of the High Council of Time Lords.
I am definitely a madman with a box.
Anyone for jelly, baby?
I'm the Doctor. I'm 904 years old. I'm from the planet Gallifrey in the constellation of Castabras.
Hey Who fans, and welcome to the Big Blue Box podcast. My name's Gary.
My name's Adam.
And we've got a special episode 82. I was waiting for 82.
82.
Just like you were waiting for the outro music last week.
I wish I had one of those little voice modulators that Nick Briggs had, actually. I'll have to get one for future things. Voice changer.
Oh, what? Yeah, like, what, so you can sound like a Dalek or an alien or something?
Have little settings on it. Dalek setting, Cyberman setting, Tractator setting.
I must admit, when I was doing the sound effects for Merch Corner, you know the Merch Corner clip?
Yeah.
It took me ages to find a decent voice changer for the Dalek sound effects.
Oh, right. Yeah, I wondered if you were having fun doing that.
I had to do a bit of research, buddy.
Yeah.
I had to go way back to the radiophonic workshop.
Wow.
And see what tools they used to do it, which obviously is out of my scope. But yeah, as a bit of a nerdy fact, I had to get a ring modulator.
You got one?
I had to find a ring modulator.
Oh, right.
Which is obviously quite old and expensive these days, so I had to get a software version. But yeah, it works out pretty well.
Yeah, it's good. I bet you've been having a lot of fun with it ever since as well.
I did loads of different things with it as well before I settled on just the simple Merch Corner thing.
Brilliant. Save them for the Christmas tape. We'll have a listen to those.
Do you know what's quite funny though is those like voice changers or sound effect modulators, whatever you want to call it. You still have to try and sound like a Dalek when you're saying it.
Oh yeah,
in your own voice, sort of thing. Because if you just say like Merch Corner, it will just sound like that even after the thing. So you have to you have to sort of put everything into it. So you have to be like Merch Corner, and just so you still have to do all that stuff, and then it just changes the sound waves, I guess. But I did.
Is that what happened to the Daleks in Day of the Daleks? Do you think they just didn't put enough effort in?
They forgot to flick the switch.
Yeah.
I did loads though. I did like Scaro Boot Sale, just loads of different ones.
I quite like that. Scaro Boot Sale.
Scaro Boot Sale, yeah. Anyway, yes, we've got a slightly different episode for you this week. Away with the news and the merch. Be gone the story reviews. We thought we'd bring a special guest on to chat Who and all that stuff. So we've wanted to speak to this guy for a while because whenever we've reviewed stories from this era, we always bring up the subject of what was happening around that time, especially when we reviewed Survival. So we're talking about McCoy and that whole time period when Doctor Who was quite rocky and ratings were not as great as they had been in the years previous to that, and it was all sort of uncertain. And then this particular person came into it and had his own ideas and his own plan of what he wanted to do with the show and the character and so on. And when they were finding their stride and all that stuff, the BBC didn't renew the plug. Instead of, I was going to say pull the plug, but as this person said on, in the interview, they didn't renew the plug, as it were. So it's been really cool chatting to this guy. Dude, who have we got on the show to interview?
So I'm very pleased to welcome the script editor from the Sylvester McCoy era, Mr Andrew Cartmel.
Hi guys, thank you for having me.
It's really great to have you on the show, Andrew. Thanks for making the time to come on. We know you're a busy man.
No, it's a pleasure, buddy. It's a pleasure.
Okay, so we wanted to fire you a load of questions because we've got quite a bit to talk about for your time on the show.
Good.
But for the benefit of our listeners who are not up on some of the classic era, the McCoy era, just tell us a bit about your sort of roughly your involvement in the show. And
well, mostly I just did the cooking. I made sausages when we were on location. You're
the catering guy.
I was the script editor, and in those days, the script editor had an enormous amount of responsibility compared to the role now. So it was more like what they call a showrunner. I mean, they called Steve Moffat a showrunner, which he is.
Yeah.
And so it was very much like that. Although I would just mention that in America, where the term originated, a showrunner is something different. A showrunner is actually more of a senior producer role as well as being a creative role. So what I basically had was creative control of the scripts. If I could get John, the producer, to sign off on something, then that was it. I had total freedom in terms of choosing the writers, choosing the stories, and everything else. So it was a fantastic role. And unlike anything today, except, as I say, people like Moffat.
Okay, well, that sounds... So you had complete freedom to go ahead and make the show how you saw fit, really.
Yeah, and we had very little interference from higher up because nobody... It's hard for people to grasp this now, but in those days, nobody was interested in Doctor Who. Nobody cared about it. We were just sort of off at best, we were just off in a corner and left to our own devices. At worst, they wanted to get rid of us, which eventually they did, because there was an anti-Who feeling. But the point of this is that as long as John Nathan Turner, the producer, was happy with what I was doing, there was no interference from any other quarters, which, in a sense, gave me a much freer hand than people like Steve or it'll be Chris Chibnall soon, or Russell, all of whom, are very strong creative forces, but they have a lot of masters to answer to. I was very lucky. As long as John was happy, and he was a good creative, collaborative partner for most of the time, then it was great. It was clear sailing.
Were you aware of the feeling from the hierarchy at the BBC when you took the job? Or did that kind of
when I took
come into it?
It gradually began to dawn on me that we were considered the very uncool kid at school.
Right.
And then it also began to... It was really actually only in later years, I began to put together that Michael Grade had hated the show and tried to kill it. And then eventually it did sort of... It's difficult to say that they killed it off because it's more like they just kind of let it languish and then just did nothing with it. So it wasn't a deliberate killing off effort. It was more like just, we're never going to renew it sort of thing. So just let it kind of fade away.
Yeah.
So, and the reasons for that, over the years, I've begun to sort of have my own theories about that. I think when Grade was in power, this was a period when Colin Baker was the Doctor. Now, Colin is a terrific actor, and he could have been a great Doctor, but there was two things that militated against that. One was the kind of character that they fashioned for him was very unsympathetic. Like, it began with this regeneration where I think he came out of it and tried to murder the companion. The other was kind of crazed by the process. And that's an interesting story device, but I've spoken to Eric Saward about it. Eric was my predecessor as the script editor, and he's a very clever man, a very good writer. And I've talked to him about it, and what happened is they sort of painted themselves into a corner, because once you start with this kind of nasty, negative, kind of hostile, aggressive Doctor, you are kind of stuck with it for a while. They kind of had to work their way out of that corner, and that took time. And so you've kind of wrong-footed yourself from the start by having this unsympathetic figure. But that was one problem. The other problem, which I know it sounds silly, but I think it was just as big, was this terrible costume they had. And I often talk to Colin about this. And I think that there was this sort of fan costume that somebody proposed, which was all blue. I don't know if you've seen it. It's the same outfit, but it was all blue.
Yes.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah.
The real-time one, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's not the greatest costume a Doctor ever had, but it's perfectly serviceable. And if they'd gone with that, I really do think Colin's whole era on the show would have been better. So Colin had the odds stacked against him in terms of the characterization, including the costume. So you had that. He was the Doctor who was on the screen, and then you had some particular stories, which I think raised the hackles of people in the BBC hierarchy. And one of those is Vengeance on Varos, which is very interesting, because Philip Martin, the writer, is one of my favorite TV writers, and I've actually interviewed him about it. He's a terrific writer, and in many ways, Vengeance on Varos I think it's a superb science fiction adventure, but I don't think it's a good Doctor Who story. And the reason I say that is because it's too nasty. It's kind of deliberately nasty because it's addressing the issues of... Back in those days, they had a thing called video nasties, which was basically It was a moral panic about horror movies which were available on video.
Okay, yeah.
And that was what they were addressing in Vengeance on the Virus. It was actually one of the themes of the show was about depicting terrible things on screen. Because if you've seen it, they have this kind of video feed that they send to the populace of people being tormented and tortured. So it's quite nasty, near-the-knuckle subject matter. And on top of that, the Doctor's characterization in it is not perfect. I mean, I've spoken to the writer about this. There's a bit where these guys fall into an acid bath. The Doctor doesn't actually push them; they kind of fall in an attempt to attack him. And these guys fall in the acid bath, and the Doctor has a quip along the lines of, "I won't join you if you don't."
Yeah, that's right.
See, if that was James Bond, that would be fine. If that was Arnie Schwarzenegger, that would be fine. But for the Doctor to be quite that callous, I think was not good. I mean, I've discussed that with Philip Martin because I thought it might be an ad lib by Colin, but it was scripted. He liked that line a great deal. But I don't go with that characterization of the Doctor. And the thing I'm getting at here in kind of a long-winded way is you had Colin's Doctor who had some, the odds stacked against him in terms of appeal already. And then you had some quite savage stories. Vengeance on the Virus also has some really kind of scary stuff where the companion Perry is being transformed into this sort of bird-like creature. And a kind of fairy tale horror thing, and yet it's really, I could really imagine kids getting scared by it. Now, scaring kids is part of the brief on Doctor Who, but there's ways of doing it, and I think that, I'm not sure, but I've often thought that what happened was that Michael Grade saw Vengeance on Barrows and his head exploded. I mean, probably the show had been running down for a while because John had been a producer on it for a long time. And so it had slightly got into the doldrums. So people weren't wild about it. People in the BBC hierarchy weren't wild about Doctor Who. And then this series of negative things happened. I think culminating in Vengeance on Virus. Now, I don't know this for a fact at all. This is just my theory. But something like it, I'm sure, happened. What happened is that the senior people at the BBC didn't like what they were seeing on the screen. They were fed up with Doctor Who. They've never respected the show anyway. Because it's science fiction, they consider it a kid's show. And they'd started to sharpen the knives and look for an opportunity to get rid of it.
Yeah. So, I was in my early teens when the Colin Baker era was going out, and I really didn't like all the violence and sort of dark storylines that were coming in as a kid at the time. I mean, I quite like it now, but back then I was kind of like falling out of love with the show a little bit, which is why when Sylvester comes in, I absolutely fell back in love with it. I love the McCoy era. But I agree, there was a lot of needles and knives and things creeping in, a lot of blood, and I was thinking, "Oh, this is going too far." I mean, Attack of the Cybermen's very violent.
It was, yeah. You see, what they wanted, John and Eric wanted, is they wanted to have good stories, right? And they saw good stories in terms of powerful drama, and they saw powerful drama in terms of violence, which was the wrong approach. I mean, you can have a great deal of darkness and nastiness in Doctor Who, but it's got to kind of be framed within a certain context. And part of that context is you've got to feel the Doctor is against that nasty stuff and he's helping people and that he's a good guy and that he's sort of this safe haven for the audience's sympathies. And at the time, the way that they were developing Colin, they hadn't got to that point with him. So you had nowhere to go. You had this nastiness and you had no refuge from it, I feel. And as you say, lots of violence and sharp knives and stuff. And I don't think that's the way to do it. I think you can have lots of horror and violence and terrifying things and darkness in Doctor Who, but there's just a particular way of doing it, and they didn't get it right at that time.
What surprises me is JNT was quite fickle about what he would allow in the show and would sometimes veto, the silliest little thing. And yet, it always surprises me some of the stuff he did allow in that era.
Yeah,
it almost feels a little bit like, not that he took his eye off the ball, but I always sort of think, knowing some of the stuff he wouldn't allow in.
Fickleness and inconsistency is absolutely right. I think, you see, what would happen was John would get very sensitized because there'd be complaints about the violence or whatever, and so he'd be really worried about it. But at other times, he'd just think, oh, that's great. I think, you see, John sort of felt it was all a fantasy, which it is. But I don't think he realised that was my cat knocking something off the table.
Oh, the cat's in.
The cat's here. Those are my glasses, damn her. So he never quite got what would work and what would get him into trouble and what wouldn't. And so sometimes he would veer too far the other way, and like he would refuse the smallest things. And at other times, the classic example was on a show I did called Paradise Towers, which was brilliantly written by Stephen Wyatt, with whom I had lunch yesterday, great writer. And we at that time there was another moral panic about knife crime, which is entirely understandable. Even today, or even more today, it's a terrible issue. So, but the particular panic was about depicting knife crime on screen, right? And so we knew that this. When I say we, me and Stephen knew that this was a sensitive issue. And so when we had the sequence with the Resis are the residents of a tower block, which is sort of degenerate residents. They're cannibals, and Stephen loves to say also lesbians. But there appear to be these two lovely old ladies. So it's a classic kind of fairy tale thing, like when you're invited to the gingerbread house by the nice old lady who turns out to be a witch. What happens is the Doctor's companion, Mel, is sort of taken into their flat by these Resis, the residents, who turn out to be these cannibals who want to eat her. So this is all great stuff. But we knew that there was this sensitivity about knives. So in his script, Stephen very carefully not given the Resis knives, because they're going to take her into the kitchen and sort of cut her up and eat her. He'd given them a trident and a net, like gladiators would have in the arena. These kind of archaic implements, these archaic weapons, which were ideal because they had a kind of an interesting kind of fantasy resonance to them. And also, they're not the kind of things that any kid could get on the street, so it was perfect. However, when it came to shooting the show, we discovered that Nick Mallet, the director, had decided to give the Resis these huge, great, sharp kitchen knives, and John had totally approved it. And Stephen and I went to John to say, hey, look, we deliberately kept knives out of the script for this reason. And John said, no, it'll be fine. It looks great. And they did look very sinister and menacing. So we said, okay. And then they'd shot the show, they transmitted it, and there was this huge outcry because, it featured knives. And I've always remembered that partly because John afterwards said, you were right, we were wrong, which was incredibly good of him because almost nobody in the world, especially a television producer, will ever admit to being wrong about anything. So John could make these mistakes, but he could also be quite good about them.
That's for the benefit of our listeners. We're referring to John Nathan Turner, who was the producer on the show when you were during your tenure.
For a huge length of time, wasn't he?
Yeah. So what was your
15 years or something? Sorry, carry on.
Yeah. What was your relationship like with John when you first joined? Was there any? Did you see eye to eye immediately, or was there creative differences?
We didn't see eye to eye immediately, but we did eventually, because you have to remember we were like two soldiers in the same foxhole under shelling from enemy fire. So that we rapidly formed a bond,
right,
united against the world, but we didn't always agree. And we did occasionally have arguments and fallings out, but we always fell back in again. And the thing that was good about John, the thing that was bad about John is that he had a temper, and you couldn't, he'd be sweet as pie one moment, then he'd snap. You couldn't predict it. And I always put it down to the fact that he was a serious heavy drinker, and booze always gives people bad tempers and makes them a bit emotionally unstable. So, but also he was under huge pressure. That making the show was an enormously pressured business, and his personal life was like a minefield. His dad was seriously ill. All this stuff was going on. So there were reasons for John being a bit emotionally short-tempered, a bit unstable.
Right.
And so, but that's not an ideal thing for your partner that you're working with, your work partner, or your boss, which is what he was. So that wasn't ideal, but this sounds like I'm painting a picture of him as a difficult person. 90% of the time, he was fine. And the great thing was, well, a couple of great things. John was always open to giving new talent a chance. That's why I got the job. And equally importantly, he let me hire all these new writers. When I first sat down, John had some writers he wanted me to look at, people he wanted to work with. And when they didn't pan out with me, I didn't think they were right. He was fine. He could have insisted that I work with these people, and he didn't. So, the only thing I've really got against John in that area is that he stuck me with Pip and Jane Baker. We did a story called Time, and you laugh. Yeah. Some people love that story, and I always say I won't take any credit for it. But also, if you don't like it, and I don't like it, I won't take any blame, because it was just, if I'd had proper script editor powers on that, proper autonomy, I would not have done that script with those writers. I would have done anything but. So that's the one real grievance I have against John in the area of working with writers, is that I had to allow Time in the Rani to happen. However, having said that, he was really good at, after all, that was when I just arrived on the show. I had no experience, and he had worked with these writers a lot before. So that's his reason for insisting on it. After that, he let me have completely free rein with which writers I wanted to hire and which stories I wanted to do. Every story and every writer had to be approved by him, but he wasn't unreasonable about that. So I would say, like, taking it all together, I'd say John was a terrific producer because he gave me a lot of creative freedom. He seldom interfered. And compared to the sort of hoops you'd have to jump through today, it was an amazingly good situation.
I'm just thinking, yes, like Stephen Moffat and Russell T Davies, I bet they would have loved to have had that amount of freedom, to do what they wanted, really.
Absolutely. And that freedom goes hand in hand with the fact that nobody cared about the show. So we could do anything we wanted as long as we didn't have giant knives on it, effectively. These days, because it's a hit, it's much more under scrutiny. So I don't know if that situation could ever return.
Right.
Did you feel like you'd found your feet by the time you'd sort of got Time in the Rani out the way? Was it sort of like from Paradise Towers onwards?
Yes,
was that kind of, you felt more comfortable?
Absolutely. And as soon as we started hitting, you see, there were still problems with Paradise Towers, chiefly, and I don't want to sound negative about Bonnie Langford, who's a very good actress, and she's done some fantastic work with Big Finish subsequently. But the character she played was dreadful. I mean, the character of Mel was just she was a screamer, she was frilly. If you wind back to look at Mel's characterization, the way she was conceived, she's supposed to be a computer scientist. You can do interesting things with that character, but they didn't. So Bonnie's persona, which had been carried over from the Just Williams stories, is that what they're called? Yeah, which was as a sort of screamy girl, combined with the lack of development of the male character, meant that the companion was not a strong companion. So that was one of the flaws with Paradise Towers. There were other problems. Richard Briers, who's a magnificent actor, was allowed to eat the scenery, in my opinion. And I think that's because Nick Mallett, who was a very nice man and could be an extremely talented director, I don't think he could stand up to a star.
Right.
I think he was just too polite to say to Briers, turn it down, mate, from 11 to 3, which is what it needed. And so there are these various problems with it. There's some problems with the design. The robots that are supposed to be chasing people, the robot cleaners, sort of trundle along at a gentle pace. They could never catch anybody. But these, having said all that, Paradise Towers, I did begin to feel we got it right, because we'd got a good writer and a good story, and we'd escaped Time in the Rani. I mean, it's a much more interesting situation, isn't it? I mean, Time in the Rani is sort of a standard kind of space opera, pulp science fiction on a distant planet. This is set on a recognizable, it's an alien planet, it's a recognizable environment. It's this high-rise ghetto, which we could all relate to. So instantly, which was Stephen's brilliant concept, which is a much better setting for a Doctor Who story. You had the kid gangs, the Kangs, which I'm very fond of.
Oh yeah, I love the Kangs.
Yeah, and so they spray paint the TARDIS. There's lots of great things in that. So yes, in answer to your question, we've begun to hit our stride with Paradise.
I love the world that we're brought into in Paradise Towers. Like you said, there's so many characters and stuff in that story. It's brilliant. And just going back to Time in the Rani, I have found myself defending it a little bit, because despite all the faults it had and everything, it was the fact that I enjoyed it so much as a kid at the time that I still enjoy it now. I can totally see all the, why you were keen to get it out of the way and all that. But it was just this new Doctor having Sylvester blast onto the screen, and because I had sort of not really enjoyed much of the Colin era, for me, when Time in the Rani came on, it was a breath of fresh air to me. But I do get a lot of stick for liking it, but it's more of a sort of nostalgia thing, and it's just Sylvester coming on and all that. But I agree, Paradise Towers has got a different feel to it, and you do feel a progression, I think, from there onwards.
I think so. Just to return to Time in the Rani for a second, the actors were terrific. I wish they'd been given more to do. And also the design. I think it's Jeff Powell. You may have to check it out, but the designer was absolutely brilliant. He'd won a BAFTA for a story for a play about Kafka, which I think was called, it wasn't called The History Man, but it was called something like that. And so he'd just won a BAFTA, and his designs were just superb. I mean, stunning, stunning designs. So there were good aspects to that story. But let's draw a veil over it.
Yeah, let's draw a veil over that giant brain.
Which was John's idea. There's no giant brain in the original script, and John said at one point in the script meeting, "You know what this story needs? It needs a giant brain in it." And he was right. He had this good instinct for kind of again, to use the term pulp science fiction, not in a derogatory way, but you kind of need these big, crazy, spooky concepts in Doctor Who.
If I had my way, Andrew, that brain would be in my house right now, because I was at an auction where it was there, and I wanted to bid on it, and my other half was, severely holding my arm down. So if I had my way, it'd be in the hallway.
Pulsate a treat. Its pulsating powers might be a bit reduced.
It looked a bit battered, I have to be honest.
Yeah, but it was impressive.
Yeah. Have you got any props from? Did you steal anything, Andrew?
The terrible things I used to. I used to have a dragon's head from Time of the Rani, because I don't know if you've seen the building. It had this kind of crazy kind of Viking aesthetic with these slightly abstract dragon's heads, and I used to have one of those, which was gorgeous. It used to be hanging in my hallway in London, and that's gone, sadly. And more heartbreakingly still, I actually had a Kang crossbow, which was a beautiful prop. Again, gone. Oh. Sorry. I do have, but I do have a baby tetrap, if anybody out there.
Oh, nice.
I call them babies because they were actually, to cheat the camera, they sort of had miniatures to hang in the background. They hang upside down like bats.
Okay.
Yes. The back of shot, so you had these miniatures. And so I've got one of those, which, it might turn up on eBay one day.
Oh, wow.
Yes, open to offers, guys, and it's in beautiful condition. So but that's the extent of it. I wish I'd filled a warehouse with those props, both for sentimental and financial reasons.
What was the thing that Ben Aronovich stole? I was reading in your book. Didn't he steal something from one of the props, or was it something else?
I think using the word steal is probably...
Sorry, not steal, no.
Salvage would be
salvage,
all this stuff is up in a skip. I can't remember what Ben might have gone for. Was it something from the Dalek story?
It must be, yeah. I'm trying to think. What was it? Something from Battlefield? I can't remember now. Just remember seeing in your book that he took something, salvaged something as well. I remember just having a vision of you guys with all this.
I'm sure
all these
it doesn't have that either anymore. What a shame. I'd love to know what it was. If we could have chosen one thing, it would have been the special weapons Dalek, but I think somebody else got that.
It might not have been Ben, actually. I might be doing him an injustice now, but yeah.
The thing about Ben is that he was, I think, one of the greatest Doctor Who writers ever, but like me, he wasn't really a fan of the show as such. So he wouldn't have been one, he wouldn't have been particularly gunning to fill his life with memorabilia.
Right, it probably wasn't Ben then. I've probably done him an injustice there. But just while we're talking about Ben, actually, I'd love to see him write for the new series. And I think I've heard you say somewhere that he's got this brilliant idea for a script.
He's got a great story, which we discussed years and years ago, and it's perfect. But I'm slightly guarded talking about it because I was at a little event in North London, and I mentioned this. I said, Ben has this great idea for a story, and there was a local newspaper reporter there, and he reported this as Ben Aronovich has been commissioned to do a story for Doctor. I don't know what has happened to standards of journalism, but you've got to be very careful about what you say. And then there was this sort of whispering campaign on Twitter of people were sort of had latched onto this, and I had to sort of come down hard and say, no, he's got a great idea. It's in his head. It isn't anywhere else except in his head. I actually went up to Steve Moffat a couple of years ago at one of the Christmas screenings at the BFI, and I said, "Oh, Ben's got this great idea for a Doctor Who story," and Moffat just laughed. He just laughed.
Really?
He sort of laughed in an enigmatic way.
Oh.
So I have no idea what that meant. Did it mean? But what it didn't mean was, tell me the story, Andrew. Let's get Ben in.
Yeah.
So
that's a shame, because I would love to see that, and I'm really intrigued to know what this idea is because obviously Ben does the brilliant Rivers of London. And I keep thinking he'll get bored soon, and whatever it is, he'll just put it into another story, and then it won't make it to Doctor Who. So. It's
probably uniquely a Doctor Who concept.
Oh, okay.
I don't go into it because it would blow it.
Right.
I want to tell you the title, which is a great title.
Oh,
but and Ben has moved beyond Doctor Who now. I'm sure if they made me the showrunner or Ben the showrunner, which would be a great idea, and got us to work on the show, he would dust it off quite quickly. But that isn't the situation at the moment, so it's going to have to remain in the background. But yeah, Ben could write a great Doctor, as could Mark Platt. Actually, they should hire more.
Yes,
immediately.
You mentioned a minute ago, Andrew, that Ben wasn't a particular fan of the show before he was started work on it. Was that the same for you? Did you say you weren't? Did you not really watch much of it? Or?
It was part of the fabric of our childhood. I mean, Doctor Who was just there. I compared to things like the Mini, the car, the Mini, and indeed the Mini skirt and the Beatles and James Bond. It was all part of that great British 60s thing.
Right.
And I did see some really seminal episodes when I was a kid. I saw the first Hartnell Dalek story. I saw the episode where they captured the Dalek and take it apart. And that completely, as I've often said before, blew my mind. And I had some Doctor Who annuals, so it was part of my childhood. But I didn't follow it. I didn't watch it. I mean, after I was a teenager, then I was at university, I really wasn't watching television at all.
Of course. You wouldn't have been watching much TV at that time.
Well, and in those days, there was no time shifting, by which I mean you couldn't record off telly. Because,
yes. Yeah.
But, I mean, this is going to sound astonishing to your listeners, but we VHS, they probably don't even remember VHS. It was a tape that you could record things off the television on. That really, the situation with VHS, when I came into the BBC to start work on Doctor Who, if you wanted the VHS machine, there was a special BBC VHS machine which was chained to a trolley with a television attached to it. So if you wanted to watch a tape of something, you had to go to a special room and get the special trolley with a special VHS machine strapped to it and sign it out and trundle it to your office, because that's how special home recording of video was in those days. So this is all by way of sort of making a special plea as to one reason why I hadn't seen so much of Doctor Who was just there wasn't the opportunity.
I think some of our younger listeners will not relate to that, but I can absolutely relate to it, because in my primary school, my teacher used to send me and another friend of mine down to the room to get the TV, which was on the trolley with the video machine.
The room of doom with the VHS machine.
So we spoke about John Nathan Turner and your relationship with him. Let's speak a little bit about Sylvester now.
Yep.
Oh, yes.
So you would have worked relatively closely, I would assume, with Sylvester.
Yeah, I was there when they were casting for a new Doctor. And John, again, this was great of him because he didn't have to do it. He enlisted me. So I was sort of sat in the room while he got people in as prospective doctors. And Sylvester was always the front runner. Like from the moment we saw him, we both wanted him to be the Doctor. He was just so perfect for it. So I was gunning for Sylvester from the start. I wrote the audition pieces, which Sylvester and some other actors did. They got some actors in to do these auditions and record them. To film them, and that they got Janet Fielding as the sort of co-star in these. But I was the guy who wrote these two audition pieces that Sylvester and the other actors did, and I remember the hair going up on the back of my neck as I heard my words being spoken by Sylvester. It was wonderful. And then we got him, which was a triumph. We got the Doctor we wanted, and then became the business of trying to work out how to use him best. Because if you look at Tom Nirani, he's doing pratfalls, he's being a clown. He doesn't know what to do. None of us knew what to do because it was all new to us. In Paradise Towers, things begin to settle down a bit. And by the time of Dragonfire, I'd say, and this is probably partly because Sophie comes on board in that story, I thought we'd begun to really get it right in terms of his characterization.
You must have been quite excited, actually, I think, by the next series, I would assume, because the dynamic between Sylvester and Sophie is just fantastic. So I guess when you were thinking about new writers for the Sylvester's next series, you were just thinking, right, let's do this, let's get into it,
But you have to. That's a natural thing for you to think, have it on the outside of it, but on the inside of it. By the time we'd got Sophie, we already had the stories for next season because you're always working ahead. Yeah. So as soon as I knew what kind of companion we had, by the time Sophie had joined, all the scripts were being written for the next season. So it was like it's a mad downhill motor race. It's like wacky races when you're making. It never stops. So yes, it was all in process, and then you sort of discover you want things to work out. Like you want to get Sylvester as the Doctor, and you want him to work out as the Doctor. Then you want to create a new companion called Ace, and you want to get. Then you see Sophie as the prospective actress for that. You want to get Sophie, and then you want to get the character developed, and you want these things to work out. But we had no idea how well they'd work out. It was just like this joyous discovery. It's like, it works. We wanted to do something and it actually worked. It was a fantastic situation.
But both your audition pieces you just mentioned, they actually did find their way into the show eventually, didn't they?
Yeah, that was kind of interesting. And just if anybody's interested in knowing what these are, you can borrow, or better yet, buy a copy of Script Doctor because they're included in the back of the book. Yeah, so well, what happened with those was... Sylvester really fell in love with with this one. I'd written this one. There were two scenes, and in fact, I think only one of them really found its way in the show. One was a confrontation. You see, what basically they were hard and soft. There was this confrontation where the Doctor meets this female despot, this tyrant, this dictator, and no prizes for guessing that I had Maggie Thatcher in it.
Yeah.
When I wrote it, I think I just called her the Iron Lady. So there's a scene where he stands up to this baddie. So that was one. But the other, to give emotional range, because you needed to see what the actor was capable of, the other audition piece was completely different, and it was a farewell scene between the Doctor and the companion, and it was. The Doctor, and yeah, I'm getting a little tingle thinking about it. I think I did a really good job. I was inspired, in that case, by Alan Moore, who'd done this brilliant thing in Watchmen about Dr. Manhattan and about the way he looks at time and it sees it all happening at once. And I thought, well, the Doctor must be like that because because he's a time traveler and he has such longevity. His view of the world must be very different from us. So there was this. I knew I could write this very poetic farewell scene, and I did a good job on it, and everybody's very pleased with it, and Sylvester loved it, and he kept trying to get it into the show because he felt it was one of the best things he'd done, and eventually he did manage to crowbar it in to Dragonfire. But I think when you're mentioning the other one, you're probably thinking of the Happiness Patrol, are you?
Yes, I am, yeah.
Yeah,
yes.
Well, we didn't actually ever use any of that material in the Happiness Patrol, but just it was a similar sensibility in the fact we had a female villain that I encouraged the writer Graham Curry to base on Maggie Thatcher, who was my bête noire at the time.
Right.
So only one of those ended up in the show, really, which was the Dragonfire one. What happened was Sylvester wanted to do that scene, and I felt it was wrong to, just to take my scene and cut and paste it into Ian Briggs's excellent script. So we got Ian to write a similar scene, but what happened was Sylvester wanted the original, and we eventually, at some point, somebody in the production team for Dragonfire said, "Oh, can we just have a look at that scene you wrote for Sylvester? We just want to have a little look at it." So I gave it to him. Next thing I knew, it was being photocopied and pasted into the script, and that I'm sure that was a nuisance for Ian. No writer's wild about having words added to their script, but I'm quite proud of it because it did work well, and it's like one of the few little scenes of my own writing which had got into the show. I was very noble when I was working on the show because I could have hired myself to do endless scripts, but I felt it was more important to get new writers on board, which was the right decision morally, but financially wasn't the best one.
Right.
So it's nice to have these bits, like the bit at the end of Survival, which I wrote too. It's nice that I wrote a few small scenes, a few small bits of dialogue, but they were very resonant bits of dialogue, so I'm very proud of those.
Because the other one, the one you were just referring to is Mel's leaving scene, isn't it? At the end of Dragonfire, where it's funny thing time.
Yeah.
And basically the Doctor just not wanting to say goodbye. And it's a lovely little scene.
Days like crazy paving, that was the image.
Oh, yes. And what's the hugging shadow? No. What's the other line? Yeah, I can't remember.
I wrote it myself and I can't remember.
Is it not hugging shadows? I can't think what it is, but yeah.
There is one about fighting with shadows at some point.
That's it. Yeah, it's a lovely little scene. Was Sylvester aware of the sort of pressure of taking over as a new Doctor from, because obviously with all the things that had gone on during the Colin Baker era, all the hiatus in brackets, all that, was he aware that he was sort of the new, the sort of the boulder that he was going to have to bear on his shoulders for taking over? Well,
what you were talking about is the sort of burden of disapproval at the BBC amongst the powers that be. Is that what you mean? No. Much more important than that was when you become the Doctor, you're not really ready for the level of public scrutiny and fame, which is going to come sweeping into your life. And John would have briefed him about that, but nobody could prepare him for that. No, the thing about the BBC's disapproval was it's sort of something that came and went, and it mostly manifested itself as ignoring the show and not giving it any resources. So it wasn't like there was this guy waiting around the corner with a hatchet. It wasn't like that. It's more like they just didn't like us, didn't care about us, and didn't want to help us. Then eventually decided to pull the plug, or not renew the plug, as it were. But no, what Sylvester wasn't prepared for was the tsunami of fame that was going to come his way.
Right, yeah, because that's what I thought. I just thought, him thinking, right, I've got to get this right, or, it's going to get another hiatus sort of thing.
Nobody aware of that. It was always just a background thing. It was never stated as such either. It was just this kind of general lack of love of the show.
So you pushed quite heavily for Sylvester right from the beginning. So that first audition, you were sounds like you were smitten with him really, and you wanted him in the role.
Yeah, he was great, but John too, because we both just saw that he was perfect for it. So it was. In the case of John, I was pushing at an open door, or rather, we were both pushing in the same direction.
Right.
It was just a case whether we'd get the nod from the higher up echelons, and we did. So it was great.
And if Sylvester hadn't have auditioned, can you reveal any other actors that went for that?
The only name I remember is Ken Campbell. And Ken Campbell was actually Sylvester's mentor. Ken was this crazy, brilliant, mad genius who ran something called the Science Fiction Theatre of Liverpool, which did such great, incredible stage shows as the Illuminatus trilogy. And also they did The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I believe, on stage. Anyway, these were legendary shows, crazy shows. I saw one which is an adaptation of a Howard Lovecraft story. Sorry, an H.P. Lovecraft story called The Case of Charles Dexter Ward. Anyway, Ken Campbell, this brilliant force in the theatre, he came in and auditioned for it. And he was kind of too powerful and too scary. I felt like he was a bull in a china shop. I think it would be possible for somebody like him to be a terrific doctor, but it was not the characterization we were looking for. Anyway, we'd already found Sylvester and we're in love with him. But yeah, Ken Campbell was a very interesting possibility too.
Okay. And did you have a similar feeling with Sophie?
Yeah, now Sophie was just perfect, and Ace was the perfect character, but John kept his options open by developing another female character similar. Because I figure you've got two kinds of companions. There's screamers and there's fighters. So we had Ace in Dragonfire, and we also had Ray, who's this sort of chick on a motorcycle in Delta and the Bannerman.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And Sarah Griffiths, I believe, was the actress. And good character, created by Malcolm Cole, and a good actress. But John just he developed these two slightly similar characters in parallel just so he could keep his options open. He didn't want to bet all his chips on, all his gambling chips on Sophie. But in the end, we went with Sophie, which was great and the right decision.
How close did Ray become to becoming the companion?
Well, I don't think very, because while I was telling you that anecdote, I was just running through my head, because you see, the thing about Ace was John got me to create the character of Ace for the reason that if you have this companion who's created by a freelance writer, they get paid every time the character is used, quite rightly. But if she's created by some poor stooge like me who's on a staff contract, the character is owned by the BBC. But in the case of Ray, I don't think we did anything like that, and Malcolm would have owned the character. So although that would have been a possibility, I think that it was pretty unlikely. I think that John, this might have just been leverage with Sophie's agent partly, so that they didn't assume it was a done deal that Sophie would become the companion. And also it did allow a plan B, in case of emergency, break glass and get other companion.
We recently reviewed Delta and the Bannerman, didn't we, Gary? And one thing we thought about that is it looked an awful lot of fun, that story to make, because it's just bubbling with energy. And I don't know, I just get the impression you guys had a ball down in Barry Island down there.
Well, Barry Island, so it was like a bit of a holiday, and we had a fun party there. Cast and crew parties on location are a hoot. And I remember having a really nice time. It was good weather, which always helps, because you're shooting in pouring rain. And also we had this great cast, like Don Henderson as Gavrock. He was so good, man.
Oh, yeah, I love Don Henderson.
He's just brilliant. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about him. So there were a lot of great things we got right in the story. And the writer Malcolm Cole and I were down on location, and we stayed there. And we had a great time. So it was a lot of fun. I think that story suffers a little bit from being a bit too lighthearted and camp. The camp is mostly John's instigation, but it's got a lot of great things in it. The 50s setting and scene was a really smart move. But
I love the space bus.
Yeah, the crazy space bus, which got blown up with all the space tourists killed. Yeah.
Shouldn't laugh, terrible, really, but yeah. Them being killed, I mean.
Yeah, they're killing Ken Dodd, which is always fun.
Oh, poor old Ken. Yeah. No, it's a fun story, that one, I think. Yeah.
Well, I think Malcolm is a terrific writer. We were still finding our way, and we still had Bonnie. And again, I don't want to sound nasty about Bonnie, but the character of Mel wasn't great. So if we'd had, a proper kick-ass companion already in place, it would have helped that story.
Absolutely.
Actually, at what point was, because you were saying about how things are planned quite far ahead, at what point did you decide, or did Bonnie decide that she was going to go and you were going to get a new companion? When did that start?
I think that would have been in John's mind from as soon as he knew the season was going to go. He had a new doctor, so you don't change the companion at the beginning of the season. I think he felt it was kind of all change. Once you get a new Doctor, you sort of want to get a companion who's suited to them. So you have one season while you have the old companion for continuity, so it's not alienate viewers, and then you start bringing the changes.
You just to rewind just a second, you mentioned that you were down on location at Barry Island and so on. Were you involved quite heavily on location for many of the stories with shooting and so on, or were you kind of desk bound that some writers can be?
I started off going on location partly because it was a novelty and I loved it, partly because I had the time, but I got more and more busy.
Right.
And novelty wore off, so I was on location less and less as the series progressed.
Okay, and was that something that did it have an effect on anything? Because I have the feeling that with some script editors or producers, that there can be a sense of wanting to sort of, it's your baby kind of thing, and you don't want anything to go wrong.
Well, the great thing about British television is that they're not allowed to change anything without consulting you. And by you, I mean the script editor, the producer, and the writer.
Right.
So there might have been some, even minor changes are supposed to be fed back through the script office. So I didn't feel that there was much danger of things going awry, except in the sense that the director can screw things up, not by changing the script, but by not shooting things properly. And there's nothing you do about that except once you've got the director, you're stuck with that.
Right, sure. And
did it feel like... Sorry, go.
No, go on, Adam.
I was going to say, did it feel like you were sort of going from strength to strength? I mean, when we get into Sylvester's second series with, Remembrance and Great Show in the Galaxy, and then further on towards Curse of Fenric and Ghostlight and that, I mean, there's some amazing stories. Did you sort of just feel like once you got into that second series that you were really on a roll?
I did feel that, and I felt it for the reason that I'd got the writers I wanted. Once I got Ben on board, once I knew that we could get Ian again because he'd done such a great job on Dragonfire, Mark Platt was shaping up nicely, and Stephen we'd already worked with. So yes, I felt it was going well because I had these writers that I wanted doing scripts that I thought were terrific. So yeah, it began to feel really good.
And did you? And were you seeing it on screen? Because sometimes, the story is there, but perhaps it didn't always translate on screen. Because of budget or whatever, but were you sort of seeing it? I mean, I think Remembrance Daleks is incredible.
Yeah.
And I can just watch it over and over again. I think it looks great, and you can feel the love that's gone into it, considering the budget you guys had at the time. And actually, a lot of what we see in those, the last two seasons of Doctor Who is just incredible what you managed to produce, given what you were working with at the time. And, did you think that when you're watching it back? Sort of think, right, God, this is good. This is good stuff.
There's a long time lag between the script and the shooting, but as soon as they start shooting, you begin to see bits and pieces, even before it's fully edited. And so in the case of the Dalek story, which I think is, if I have to nominate my favourite, that's the one that's on top most often. And I think it's a real classic. Yeah, so Remembrance, I just knew we were doing really well. So that was great. And then by the time we got to the third season, we'd got the kind of roster of directors we wanted. It was all starting to come together, thank heavens, at last.
Yeah, and all the ideas that are bubbling around in those stories are just amazing. Like you said about the writers you managed to get, but the sort of ideas behind the stories that they were coming up with are just great. Yeah,
it's not easy coming up with a Doctor Who. Sometimes it is. And when Stephen walked into the office, he had the idea for a story set in a tower block from the off. So sometimes it is easy. And sometimes it's really difficult. Like with the Happiness Patrol, it took a long time for us to come up with a story from Graham. But yeah, an ideal Doctor Who story idea is really a thing to be treasured because it's a tough show to come up with something for.
How close did the Happiness Patrol come to being filmed in black and white? I think I remember reading somewhere that initially you were thinking to do it very sort of...
No, it never could. There's no possible it could ever have happened. This was.
I like that idea. Just minimal colours coming through. I think it's such a nice idea. But yeah, I guess it wasn't. I think that's just an idea. Yeah,
it was going to be shot in this. There's a film starring Orson Welles by Carol Reed called The Third Man.
Yeah,
and that was a black and white story shot with lots of kind of crazy camera angles, very noir, film noirish. I think there was some discussion for it being shot like that, and somebody might have got the impression that we were also going to shoot it in black and white. That couldn't really happen. And the Happiness Patrol, you couldn't shoot that in black and white because it's supposed to be about this garishly coloured planet where it's false happiness. So I don't think black and white would have been the way to go.
I just remembered actually that Candyman was also at that auction that the Brain was at. I remember, I remember wanting him as well.
Yeah, don't put your money on the Brain, mate. Go for the Candyman.
Candyman, yeah. It still amazes me that how much that resembled a certain suite and how that actually came to be on screen. When you saw it, did you think, oh, what?
Well, we hadn't really. What we'd specified in the script for the Candyman was, if anybody ever ate that cheap bubblegum that used to come with stickers and cards, there used to be this cheap pink bubblegum that you got. If you, I don't know if you had bubblegum cards in this country, but basically, you got these little novelties, and they came with a free. Supposedly, they came free with a piece of bubblegum, but everybody threw the gum away. It was this hideous pink, terrible kind of chemical bubblegum. We sort of saw the Candyman. Graham Curry and I saw the Candyman as sort of having a smoothly contoured surface made of this kind of pink bubblegummy stuff. That was our concept. If you imagine maybe kind of a Michelin Man or some kind of Stay Puffed Man, kind of smooth, slightly bloated figure made of pink bubblegum. But what we got was completely different. And when I saw it, I thought two things. I thought, one, wow, that looks great. And B, we're going to get so sued.
Yeah.
Like a Bertie Bassett kind of thing. I loved it, but I thought, we're in trouble here. And indeed, there was eventually some kind of fracas and settlement regarding that. But that doesn't in any way militate against it being a fantastic design. I thought it was great.
Oh, he's a great character. Yeah, love the Candyman.
And the way his eyes spin.
And the voice as well and all that. Oh, it's brilliant.
Andrew, I wanted to ask you something.
Yes.
That has been. You've probably heard this a million times, probably at conventions and other interviews and stuff. But there's this phrase that I've been reading up on recently called the Cartmel Master Plan, which you're probably very familiar with. And it's we spoke earlier about when Colin was on the show and how. At that time, it was a little bit sort of close to the knuckle and it was a little bit dark and so on. And then when you came on board and Sylvester started and so on, was there a point, because this term has obviously been labelled because you had some great ideas for the show and for the Doctor and where you wanted to take and what direction you wanted to take it in. Is that something that you would have liked to have been on the show longer to put in place? And that whole sort of Cartmel master plan, was that something that you did as you went along, or did you have that right from the off? Like, right, I know what I want to do with this character. And
no, I had some strong ideas to start with, and they were good. I had good instincts from the off, but I sort of formulated more specific precepts as I went along. I sort of saw what worked, I saw what needed fixing, I saw which way we needed to go, and principally this was to do with giving the Doctor stature and mystery again, instead of, I felt he'd become too down to earth literally, and so it was reinvesting the character with his original mystery and a touch of darkness too, I felt. So that was, if there was a Cartmel master plan, it was to do that, and that it gradually became clear that was the way to go with it. And you said, would I have liked to have carried on to achieve it? Well, I think we did achieve that in the third season with Sylvester. Well, I would like to have rounded it out and for us to have developed the character more and for us to have handed over from Sophie to a new companion and done various things. But we didn't. And the fact that we didn't in no way detracts from what we did achieve.
Okay. And was John on board with that as well? Did he? Well,
you have to remember that there wasn't actually a file folder labeled the Cartmel Master Plan. It was just me trying a bunch of stuff and doing a bunch of stuff with the help of the writers and the support of John and what we achieved. But it's true that John did see we were pushing in a certain direction. At one point, he actually said to me, "I'm letting you push this character as far as I can," because he was reluctant about something I wanted to do. And it's true. He was a bit grumpy about that, but he let me have this huge latitude with the character. I had all this stuff that he was more than a Time Lord, all this business. At one point, John got a little bit touchy, and he said something along the lines of, "Oh, I'm letting you push this character as far as you have already. It's, you're really pushing it." And I'm not sure exactly what I wanted to do at that point, but it sort of made me realize that he was giving me enormous freedom. And he was aware that I was making changes, quite radical changes to the way the show had been. But he obviously approved, otherwise he would have stopped me. I forget what specifically he was reacting against at some point.
Sure.
It might have been the bit where, in Remembrance, where the Doctor actually just pulls out a gun and blows up a Dalek.
Yes, yeah.
Or it might have been something else. But
I do love the vision of you going over to a big cabinet though, Andrew, and opening it and pulling out a folder with the Cartmel master plan on it.
I mean, if only it'd been that organised, mate. But it was I didn't hear the term. What happened was I went to a convention called Gallifrey One in Los Angeles years later. It might have been about 1999, and I was on a panel with Paul Cornell. And Paul Cornell said, "Have you ever heard the term the Cartmel Master Plan?" I said, "No, I hadn't." But then eventually when I gleaned what people were talking about, I thought, yeah, that makes absolute sense. There was a Cartmel Master Plan, and what it was, as I said before, to reinvigorate the Doctor. But it was never a kind of formal de facto thing. It was what I was doing in a fairly disorganized way, summed up in a much more coherent fashion.
Right, okay. And since leaving the show and the various other works that you've done, you've continued work on Doctor Who with some books and some audio stuff. In any of those things, have you put in there some of the ideas that you maybe would have carried on if the show would have?
Actually, a series from Big Finish called something like The Lost Stories or The Missing Adventures.
Lost Stories, yeah.
Yeah, and I did a load of those, working with Ben Aronovich and Mark Platt. We did a terrific job of introducing the new character of Rain, for instance. So if anybody is interested in that, I'm particularly proud of a story called Animal, which I like a lot, which I did in that sequence. So that gives some flavour of what we might have done with the show had we carried on.
Yeah,
I'm really pleased Big Finish got to did those, because it was nice to sort of hear some of those ideas, brought together and finally put out there, like Sylvester in the Safe and all that, which you can just imagine. Yeah,
proud of that, and also that was in a story called Crime of the Century. It's a terrible title. That's not what we would have called it. The Big Finish just insisted on that crappy title because over the years it had become attached to that story by the fans, so they didn't want to disappoint the fans. Anyway, Crime of the Century, very good story. Animal, very proud of that, and also Earth Aid. And Mark did one called Thin Ice, which was excellent too.
How much of that had you sort of planned if there had been another series, though? Was it just a case of you'd made a few notes, ideas, or had you got sort of specific ideas?
It was just a few notes, ideas, just mostly verbal stuff. It was stuff that Ben had suggested and that we'd discussed together, things like that, and that Mark had come up with.
Yeah, and the Doctor without ruining it for anyone, because they are definitely worth getting, the Doctor does take Ace down quite a dark path, doesn't he? Which would have been very, which is very interesting. What was
the one thing that I would really like to give credit to Big Finish for, and my producer David Richardson, is that when we were sitting down to and he hired me to do that series, which I was very pleased about. I said to him, we were going to introduce the new character, and I said, "Oh, David, it's great having the new character Rain, but it's a shame that we're going to lose Sophie." And he said, "Well, you don't have to. We could have them both." And you see, he really was thinking outside the box, and that was such a great idea. So we did. So we could have Sophie in all those stories, and we had Rain as well. It was just like having your cake and eating it. And I was really, really grateful to him for that, because it was such a thrill working with Sylv and Sophie again after all those years.
Good old Big Finish.
Good old Big Finish.
We do like our Big Finish, don't we, Gary? So, we're very glad they got made. Yeah.
And are you a fan of the show now, Andrew? Do you still watch it, or?
Well, I have a standard answer to that. So my apologies to anybody who's heard this before, but with the huge success of the show now, for me, what it's like is it's like seeing your ex-wife really happy with somebody new. So you are pleased for her, but you really don't want to know too much about it. So if I can put it like that.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. And the stuff that we've mentioned, like the Big Finish and the books and stuff, have you got anything else in the pipeline coming up, Doctor Who based?
Doctor Who related? I am writing at the moment comics. I'm writing Doctor Who comics for the Doctor Who Adventures magazine, which is the kids magazine. I've written a series of comics for that, which are really fun to do, and I'm incredibly busy at the moment. The reason I say that is I want to pitch a grown-ups Doctor Who story to Titan. And because Ben and I are doing this comic series with Titan, spun off from his Rivers of London novels. If anybody's interested in Ben's writing, check out the Rivers of London novels, and definitely check out the comics as well, which I'm co-writing with Ben. So what I'm saying is I'm in an ideal position to sort of pitch ideas to Titan for a Doctor Who story. And I very much want to do that. It's just a matter of finding the time. So in answer to your question, I'm doing Doctor Who comics at the moment mostly.
I'll tell you what I am very excited for, Andrew, is your new book that's coming out. And I'm not just saying this because you're on the show. I really, really love the concept of this, called The Final Detective.
Oh, thank you. Well, this is a completely non-Doctor Who thing, but
I know. I heard you talking about it on another podcast, and I love vinyl and just the whole. Just tell us what it's about, because it sounds brilliant.
What happened was Ben and I were both out of work for years after Doctor Who, and Ben became this big best-selling novelist. And if you haven't read the Rivers of London books, please look them out. They're superb urban fantasy about the division of the London police that deals with the supernatural. And they're superb. I'm not just saying that because he's my mate. I love him. So Ben was suddenly had gone from being broke to being this best-selling author, and I was still broke. And he said to me, well, the trick is just write about what you really love. And I thought, well, what do I really love? And I thought, well, I love record collecting, I love jazz, and I love looking through old, charity shops for old records, treasure hunting for old vinyl. And I love crime fiction. So I came up with this notion of the vinyl detective, who's a record collector turned sleuth. And each story is a murder mystery which hinges on a rare or valuable record. And so I wrote the first one, written in dead wax, and then I wrote two more, and then we sold them. Titan Books is bringing the first one out in May. As I said, it's called Written in Dead Wax. And then in May of each subsequent year, there's two more to come, and if the series is successful, there'll be more still. So if you like crime fiction, if you like murder mysteries, then please do check them out. Thank you.
I just love the sound of it. It sounds great.
Well, you deserve a copy, mate. I'll autograph you as soon as it's out.
Brilliant. I look forward to it. Do you still have a keen eye for a funky T-shirt as well? Do you still? Because me and Gary love our T-shirts. Do you still wear the funky T-shirts?
The thing is, it's true, I was famed at the BBC for my funky T-shirts, and I loved them. But the thing is, and I still have them, I still own them all. I was looking through them the other day, but I almost never wear them. Having said that, I was in America and I saw this T-shirt at Walmart. It was like a psychedelic, crazy, acid-drenched T-shirt of a cat. So that, I just thought I have to have that. So sometimes I do occasionally succumb and buy a T-shirt, even though I don't wear T-shirts anymore these days. But yeah, there's nothing wrong with a good T-shirt collection.
No, you've got to love a T-shirt.
Absolutely.
So you've just come back from Gallifrey 1, haven't you, in America?
I have, and I'm just off to Dallas in April.
Oh, wow. So how was Gallifrey 1?
I absolutely loved it. I mean, Sean Lyons runs a terrific convention, and I love going to LA, not least because I've got some very good friends out there. My buddy Joe Kramer, who's a big Doctor Who fan, is also a film soundtrack composer. He did the music for Mission Impossible, Rogue Nation, which is a huge success. Anyway, Joe lives in LA, so it was a wonderful opportunity to see Joe, to see old friends, and to go shopping for records. Very good record store in LA.
Do you think you could sneak me and Gary over in a case and just say you've got a couple of heavy scripts next time you go? Because we really want to go to Gallifrey 1, don't we, Gary?
I think
just love to do that.
Come up with a great panel and see what Sean thinks, Do it. I'm hoping they'll invite me back. There's so many people for them to get over there. It's difficult to get invited, but I hope you guys do go, and if you do, we can have a drink out there.
That'd be amazing. I love all the I saw all the cosplay pictures being fired up on Twitter and stuff, and it just looked incredible. I love how everyone just gets so into it over there. We've definitely got to do it.
It is the biggest Doctor Who convention, but you shouldn't ignore the small ones. Like there's Regenerations, which is coming up soon, which my buddy, I'm not going to this year, but my buddy Dominic Glynn is going to. That's in the States, and that's run by Oni and James, who do a great con. I'm going to Dallas, which is Tim Miller's convention, in April. In May, I'm doing a little convention called Coal Hill, little boutique convention in New Hampshire, which is fantastic. Concaster, Huntsville, Alabama, that's terrific con. And then I'm doing Long Island Who for the first time in the autumn. So that's do come to all of those.
A busy bee, and also you're doing the Capitol, which I'm really hoping to get to in Gatwick, and there's loads of good people at that one. Yeah.
Yeah, and also apparently I'm doing Nottingham, which is coming.
Yeah. A busy bee.
Yes, I am indeed that.
Do you enjoy conventions, Andrew? Do you enjoy chatting to Who fans?
I wouldn't do them if I didn't enjoy them. I like the opportunity for travel. I like hanging out with fans, and to be perfectly honest, there's also opportunities for me to go record shopping in all these places. So that's one of my reasons for doing it. It's very nice. But the fans, are generally great people, and they just want to hang out. And I've made some good and enduring friendships, and met some really lovely folk doing it. So yeah, Doctor Who's brought a lot of good things my way.
Oh, fantastic! And could you remind people when your books are coming out? So you said the first one written in dead wax.
It's a double whammy because
right.
I'm writing these comics with Ben, the Rivers of London comics, and the first graphic novel collection comes out in April, and it's called Bodywork, Rivers of London Bodywork from Titan Books. So that's out in April, and it so happens that the Titan are also the publisher of my crime novel, written in dead wax, which is published on the 10th of May. So and available for pre-order on Amazon already, and incredibly cheap. So buy it there, I guess.
Okay.
I don't get as much royalties, but what the hell? Buy the book.
So
and not
April
forgetting
and May.
Script Doctor. Sorry.
Script Doctor is my memoirs about working on Doctor Who, and if you're interested in the Sylvester McCoy era, it's a unique document, and it's an excellent read. I mean, I say that myself because it's based on my diary, so it's a very factual account of the time, very accurate, and it's really like being there. It's currently out of print from Milk, who are my wonderful publishers.
I never know how to pronounce that. Yeah, Milk.
Yeah, it's like the milk you drink. That's how you pronounce it, milk.
Right.
Yeah, it's crazy, but they're hoping to bring it back, and while it is out of print, I'm doing limited print run convention editions. So if anybody gets in touch with me via Facebook, they can get it there or turn up at a con, and I can sell them a copy in the meantime.
It's really good. I mean, I read it when it first came out, and I reread it 2 weeks ago because I knew we'd be chatting to you, and it's a fascinating insight into the McCoy era. And do you still keep a diary?
You know what? I don't. And by the time I got to the end of my tenure on Doctor Who, I was too busy to keep one. And since then, I feel I've been too busy. But however, there recently, without giving too much away, there's been the possibility of working on a new television series. That is looking more and more likely. Nothing's definite in the world of television, but the possibility of working on a new TV show is looking more likely than ever before. So I've been thinking, if I do start work on a new show, I will keep a diary or a journal for the duration of the show so I can write another memoir about it, because it's such a fascinating process. And I love to capture snapshots of that creative process. So the answer is, if I do a TV show, I will again keep a diary for a while.
Oh,
there's some nice behind-the-scenes photos in here as well. I'm looking at you and Kate Eastill. Is that how you're saying it?
Kate Eastill, she was our production secretary, and she was the unsung hero of the show. There was me, John, and Kate. She was the third member of the team, and she was wonderful and really a great asset to Doctor Who.
Yeah, great stuff.
So the Script Doctor is a great book. Any of our listeners who are thinking of picking it up should absolutely pick it up. It's like Adam said, it's a great insight into the show. And the rerun that Milk did, that's the revised version, right? That's got like a load of extra pictures.
Yeah, the original edition had 8 pages of colour pictures. The Milk version has 32 pages of colour pics. And on top of that, it's got lots of added material like those audition scripts, which I mentioned, which were written when we were casting the new Doctor. They're included in it, which weren't in the original, and other new material too.
It's got intro by Stephen Moffat as well.
It does
himself.
It
does a nice little intro.
Good stuff.
And Milk always give you loads of free little bits with the book, don't they? When you pre-order, like I opened it and all this great stuff fell out, like a little Happiness Patrol sticker and stuff.
Who runs Milk? It was one of the great days for me when he got in touch with me via Twitter. And their designer Rob Hammond is a genius too. So they're really nice company. But just like everybody else, they're amazingly busy, and so it's hard for them to sort of to keep the books coming out at the same rate as before. But hopefully, they will continue to do so.
There was a copy of an old BBC letter in there, as well, which I loved because Colin Baker wrote to me on one of those bits of paper with like the BBC logo and the TARDIS at the top.
Right.
And my mum put it somewhere safe, and I never ever saw it again. So it's really nice to get one inside this book where it was like, just so I can remember it.
I've still got a stack of those BBC Doctor Who compliment slips. So if I see you guys, I can give you one.
Oh, excellent! Oh, I would love that.
Good stuff. We're hoping to get to the Capital Convention in Gatwick.
Oh, well, I hope to see you there then, chaps.
So we'll hopefully, we'll have a natter there as well.
Excellent.
Mr. Cartmel, it's been fantastic chatting with you.
I'm glad we finally managed it, guys. Hey.
Yes, we've finally got there.
I have just one last question for you, Andrew.
Fire away.
And that is, it's a nice, easy one. Do you still want to overthrow the government?
Well, yeah, I need to sort of backtrack on it. I did say I wanted to overthrow the government, but I didn't mean that. What I meant was I wanted to bring down the government. And the distinction there is overthrow involves violent means, and bring down involves bringing them down through the weight of their own corruption, through the legitimate processes of democracy. And I would love to not overthrow, but to bring down the government, because I do think it is a rubbish government at the moment. But let's face it, guys, I thought they've all been rubbish governments. There's one I could say I've wholeheartedly loved. So there you go.
There you go.
Could be an idea for a book right there.
Yes.
Bringing down the government. So thank you very much, Andrew. Yes, we will hopefully speak to you very soon.
Okay, guys. Thanks a lot. Cheers now.
Once again, just want to say a big thank you to Andrew to take the time out of his busy schedule to record with us, because we've been emailing back and forth for about 3 weeks now, I would say. We emailed him and said, we'd love to have you on the show to chat all things Who. And he was like, yeah, sounds good. Let's set it up. And then we set up a date, and then he'd have to go off and do something. And then we'd set another date, and then he'd have to go off to a convention. I think he went out to LA, didn't he, to
Gallifrey 1, wasn't
Gallifrey
it?
1, yeah. Then he came back. He was like, right, I'm all set. Let's do it this time. We're like, no, I can't do it. He's like, okay, let's do it then. So, yeah, it's been a bit of a to and fro, but fortunately, he still made time to chat to us. And what a nice chap.
Yeah, I really enjoyed talking with Andrew. Yeah, it's great. He's a busy chap. I think I called him a busy bee. So it's great that he found time to talk to us today. And I didn't want him to go, actually. I love talking about the McCoy era. I was trying to cling on to him for as long as we could. I thought it was really interesting.
It was really interesting. And there were some things that he spoke about that I hadn't heard before. Like some of the references and little stories he spoke about Colin's era. I've not heard some of that stuff about the very dark stories, and because we know that period is very dark, but we didn't really understand the reasoning behind it, and some of also like the kind of social sort of political things around the show as well, about not having knives and all that kind of stuff. You don't really hear about that, or have much knowledge to that stuff. So really insightful, and he's one of those guys where you feel like you can chat to him for hours.
Yeah, oh yeah, I could have gone on forever.
Yeah,
I think there was loads I wanted to talk about. There's a story in his Script Doctor book about when he was in a lift with Eric Saywood, and I think it's the first time we met. And I was going to ask him about that because I can't remember what happened. I think Eric said something to him which he thought he was being rude, but then it turned out it was actually a joke, which he totally got. And I wish I could remember what it was, because I was going to say to him about it. What was that between you and Eric in the lift? But yeah. And also I was going to say to him that I've always wanted to, if I had a TARDIS, I've always wanted to go back to the BBC bar. I would just love to go to that BBC bar and just look at the wealth of talent and performers that would have been in there, back in the day, the golden era of BBC Television Centre as well. I'd just love to do that. I can't imagine what it was like.
You mentioned the BBC Television Centre. When I went to London last weekend, me and the missus, we parked at Westfield Shopping Centre to get on at White City, I think.
Yeah.
And as you come out of Westfield, you're right next door, opposite the road to Television Centre. And there is still something about that place that just holds this like magical sort of aura around it. I can't really explain it.
No, I know what you mean. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So even though they're like demolishing like one half of it and all the windows are taken out and they're doing loads of work, that place, I don't know, it's just still got a very soft spot for that building. I'm gutted what's happened to that building. It's one of those things I thought would be there forever. Yeah.
I don't know what, I grew up with it. It's always been there. I just never imagined that it would get demolished. I'm so glad that it's been preserved on the, the drama and adventure in space and time.
Okay. Yeah.
Because it's so beautifully shot in that, and I think it was one of the last things to be filmed there. So at least it'll live on forever in that excellent drama. I
haven't seen that in a while,
Get it on.
Get it on. So anyway, we hope you enjoyed our catch up and chat with Andrew. We're hoping to have some more interviews on the way at some point throughout the year. So we're going to try and bag a few more people that we want to talk to that have got a decent insight into what goes on behind the scenes with Who, whether that's involvement directly with the TV show or something else. I don't know. We're just going to chat to a few more people, which will be good. So next week, we're back to normal format, and we're going to be going back to classic.
Yeah.
Classic Who. So next week, buddy, what are we going to review?
Next week, it's giant green people sat on very high chairs with some egg boxes behind them, because it is it's the Fifth Doctor story, Four to Doomsday, if you didn't guess from my description. Four to Doom. Where did this come from? Four to Doomsday, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I was going to say looking forward to that. I'm not sure if I am or not.
I'll tell you what, mate, I am actually really looking forward to it, because I haven't watched any Davison in a while.
True.
So, main story and everything else aside, I'm actually looking forward to old Cricket Jumper. So that'll be good.
Yes.
So next week, 4 to Doomsday. And we will do for episode 82 there. So just to finish off very quickly, thank you very much for listening to the show. As always, back to normal format next week. So look out on the Facebook page for the post for the 4 to Doomsday. And in order to leave us a comment, it'd be great if you could like us on Facebook so you don't miss anything coming up in the future. You can also follow us on Twitter and Snapchat and Instagram. So you can get access to all these things on the website, bigblueboxpodcast.co.uk. Remember to check out Adam's channel, The Geek's Handbag, over on YouTube and Facebook. And we look forward to your thoughts for next week's story. Until then, my name's Gary.
My name's Adam.
And remember,